June 23rd, 1944, 11:40 p.m. Commander Uno Kamio stood in the cramped, diesel-scented control room of I-52, watching his future die through a periscope. He didn't know it yet. The rendezvous with German U-530 had gone perfectly. 2 German technicians were now aboard. Radar equipment had been transferred. His massive cargo submarine carrying 2 tons of gold, 120 tons of tin, and war materials desperately needed by Nazi Germany was ready for the final push toward occupied France. Everything seemed perfect. In 3 hours, Commander Kamio and all 94 men under his command would be dead. They would die listening to a sound they couldn't identify, haunted by a technology they didn't know existed, killed by weapons they had no defense against. And miles above, in the darkness, American aircraft would record their deaths. The sounds of their submarine breaking apart would be captured on wire spools, thin metal ribbons that would preserve the crushing, crackling noises of a submarine's hull collapsing under pressure. These recordings would survive in American archives for decades, a permanent testament to the moment Japanese naval confidence died. But here's what makes this story truly terrifying. I-52 wasn't sunk by better seamanship. It wasn't destroyed by a lucky shot. It was systematically hunted, tracked underwater while diving, and eliminated with cold precision by technologies Japan didn't even know America possessed. And F-52 was just one submarine. Between 1941 and 1945, the statistics would tell a story of technological slaughter. American submarines, 1,314 Japanese ships sunk, 5.3 million tons. 56% of all Japanese merchant losses. Japanese submarines, 184 Allied ships, sunk 1 million tons. This isn't a story about a battle. It's a story about a massacre disguised as a war. It's the story of how Japanese submarine crews, skilled, disciplined, confident warriors, gradually realized they were fighting with swords against machine guns. How they came to understand that courage meant nothing against technology. How they learned that the ocean itself had become an enemy. This is the story of how sound became a weapon. How invisible technologies floating on ocean surfaces could track submarines hiding hundreds of feet below. How an industrial machine of incomprehensible scale systematically eliminated an entire naval force. This is a story of the moment Japanese submariners realized the ocean was no longer theirs. The confidence. Let's start with what Japan had, because to understand the shock, you need to understand the pride. The Japanese submarine force that entered World War II was magnificent. Approximately 70 ocean-going submarines, many of revolutionary design. These weren't crude vessels, these were engineering marvels that made American admirals nervous. Consider the I-400 class, 400 feet long, displacing 5,900 tons submerged. The largest submarines in the world, and they would remain the largest until nuclear-powered vessels appeared in the 1962nd. But size wasn't their only feature. Each I-400 could carry 3 aircraft. Actual bomber float planes, stored in a watertight hangar, launched via catapult. They could theoretically strike New York City, the Panama Canal, targets Americans thought were completely safe from submarine attack. And the range? These submarines could circumnavigate the entire world 1.5 times without refueling. 37,500 nautical miles at 14 knots. The engineering was breathtaking. They feature trim systems for submerged loitering, demagnetization cables to protect against magnetic mines, air search radar, anechoic coatings designed to absorb sonar pulses, stealth technology in 1941. The smaller submarines were equally impressive. Type C cargo submarines like I-52 could travel 21,000 nautical miles, serving as underwater cargo ships connecting Japan with its distant allies. The crews, extensively trained, disciplined. Many had years of experience. Commander Tetsunosuke Arizumi, who would lead submarine operations late in the war, was considered one of Japan's finest underwater tacticians. They had every reason for confidence. In the early months of the war, Japanese submarines participated successfully in the Pearl Harbor operation. They conducted reconnaissance. They supported fleet operations. They hunted Allied warships with sophisticated tactics. Japanese submariners saw themselves as an elite force, the underwater samurai of the Imperial Navy. They were wrong. Not about their skill, not about their courage, not even about their technology, which was genuinely impressive. They were wrong about what kind of war they were fighting. The first encounters with sonobuoys happened in 1944. Let me explain what a sonobuoy is, because understanding this technology is understanding how the war changed. Imagine a small cylinder, battery-powered, about the size of a large thermos. You drop it from an aircraft, and it floats on the ocean surface. Simple, right? Here's the terrifying part. It listens. Inside that cylinder is a hydrophone, an underwater microphone. It picks up sounds from hundreds of feet below the surface. Submarine propellers, machinery, the metallic groaning of a hull under pressure. And then it transmits those sounds via radio to the aircraft circling above. Do you understand what this means? Before sonobuoys, when a submarine dove, it became invisible. An aircraft could only attack what it could see. Once the submarine submerged, the hunt was over. Sonobuoys changed everything. Now an aircraft could drop a pattern of 5 sonobuoys color-coded purple, orange, blue, red, and yellow, creating an underwater listening grid. The aircraft would monitor each buoy in sequence, listening for any sound that indicated a submarine. And once they heard something, they could track it, follow its movements, predict where it would surface, position themselves for the killing blow. For submarine crews accustomed to safety in the depths, this was psychological warfare of the highest order. You thought you were hidden. You were actually being watched. Let's return to Commander Kameo and I-52. It's 11:40 p.m., June 23rd, 1944. The submarine is running on the surface, charging batteries, making good time toward Europe. In the darkness above, Lieutenant Commander Jesse D. Taylor's Avenger torpedo bomber, launched from escort carrier USS Bogue, detects I-52 on radar. Another technology Japanese submarines largely lacked. Taylor drops flares. The ocean below lights up like daylight. And there, caught in the illumination like a deer in headlights, is I-52. Kameo reacts instantly. Crash dive. Emergency descent. Get below the surface where aircraft can't touch you. The submarine plunges downward. Taylor attacks with depth bombs. Explosions bracket the submarine. Close. Too close, but not quite close enough. I-52 continues diving 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. In previous years of the war, this would be the end of the encounter. The submarine would be safe. The aircraft will lose contact. Not anymore. Taylor drops a purple sonobuoy into the water. Within moments, his radio operator hears it. The distinctive sound of submarine propellers transmitted from the floating device below to the aircraft above. Taylor can hear I-52 on the water. He can track its evasive maneuvers. He knows exactly where it is. He circles, listening, positioning, and then he drops something I-52's crew has never encountered before. A Mark 24 mine, codename Fido. It's not actually a mine, it's an acoustic homing torpedo. It enters the water. Its internal hydrophone activates. It hears I-52's propellers, the sound every submarine makes, the sound you cannot eliminate without stopping your engines and dying slowly from lack of oxygen. And it follows that sound. The Mark 24 doesn't need precise aim. It doesn't need luck. It just needs to get close enough to hear its target, and then it becomes inevitable. I-52 tries to evade, changes course, changes depth. The acoustic torpedo follows every maneuver, drawn by the sound of propellers like a bloodhound following ascent. And then it strikes. The sonobuoys record everything: the explosion, the sounds of the hull breaking apart under the pressure of seawater flooding in, the crackling, crunching noises like a tin can being crushed as F-52's hull collapses. The submarine sinks to the ocean floor 17,000 feet below. Commander Kameo, 94 crewmen, 14 passengers, 2 German technicians, all dead. The sonobuoy recordings survived. They're in the National Archives right now. Thin wire spools marked Gordon Wire number 1 and Gordon Wire number 2. You can hear the deaths of a submarine whose crew never knew what killed them. News traveled slowly in 1944, but it traveled. Japanese submarine commanders began comparing notes. Strange reports filtered through intelligence networks, aircraft appearing over diving positions with impossible accuracy, depth charges falling in precise patterns despite submarines being hundreds of feet deep, torpedoes that seemed to chase submarines through evasive maneuvers. Something had changed. The ocean, which had always been Japan's highway to empire, Japan's shield against invasion, Japan's path to resources in Southeast Asia, was becoming a trap. Japanese submariners started reporting experiences that sounded like paranoid delusions. We dove to escape the aircraft, but it knew exactly where we were. The torpedo followed us through 3 course changes. They're hunting us with something we can't see. But it wasn't paranoia. It was accurate assessment of reality. American hunter-killer groups centered around escort carriers like USS Bogue had combined radar, sonobuoys, and acoustic torpedoes into integrated systems that transformed submarine hunting from chance encounter into systematic elimination. USS Bogue's task force alone sank 13 German and Japanese submarines between February 1943 and July 1945 using these methods. 13 submarines, hundreds of men, all hunted with the same cold efficiency. The psychological impact was devastating. Submarine service, initially considered prestigious and honorable, became recognized as a death sentence. Young men assigned to submarine duty understood they probably wouldn't survive. Families mourned, sons departing for submarine training, knowing the statistical odds. By 1945, the casualty rate for Japanese submariners exceeded 70%. 7 out of 10 submariners died. Let that sink in. 7 out of 10. If the ocean wasn't frightening enough, what happened in June 1945 destroyed whatever confidence Japanese submariners had left. The Sea of Japan was supposed to be Japan's sanctuary, protected by 4 lines of underwater mines in Tsushima Strait. Japanese merchant shipping moved freely there, believing submarines couldn't navigate the minefields. Japanese naval planners considered these waters impregnable. They were wrong. On June 4th, 1945, 3 American submarines, Sea Dog, Crevalle, and Spadefish, entered Tsushima Strait submerged. They were equipped with FM sonar, technology developed specifically to detect underwater obstacles. As they approached the minefield, a sound filled their control rooms, a distinctive chime. American submariners called it Hell's Bells, the sound FM sonar made when detecting mines. And the bells rang constantly. Mines to port, mines to starboard, mines above, mines below, sometimes spaced only 50 yards apart. For 20 hours, these 3 submarines navigated underwater through a minefield Japanese engineers thought would stop any submarine approach. They mapped the entire minefield pattern on electronic screens, identified safe passages, threaded through barriers with electronic precision. and then they emerged safely into the Sea of Japan. Two more groups followed. Within days, 9 American submarines were operating freely in waters Japan had considered absolutely secure. The hunting was spectacular. Between June 9th and June 24th, 1,945. Just 15 days, those 9 submarines sank 28 Japanese ships, totaling 54,786 tons. They operated with impunity, surfacing at night to charge batteries, submerging during the day to attack shipping that believed itself safe. Japanese Naval Command was stunned. Intelligence reports described submarine attacks inside the Sea of Japan. Survivors reported American submarines operating freely, attacking at will, escaping without difficulty. The psychological blow was immense. If American submarines could penetrate the most heavily defended waters with technology that could navigate through minefields that had taken years to lay, then nowhere was safe. The ocean itself had become enemy territory. Let me show you just how wide the technological gap had become. American submarines had radar that could detect surface contacts at ranges exceeding 20 miles. Japanese submarines didn't receive radar until June 1944, 3.5 years into the war, and even then only in limited quantities with inferior performance. Intelligence. American forces had cracked Japanese naval codes. They knew Japanese submarine schedules, patrol areas, supply routes, and operational plans often before Japanese submarines received their orders. Fire control. American submarines used computerized target data systems that automatically calculated firing solutions. Japanese submarines relied on manual calculations that took longer and put them at greater risk. Industrial capacity. While Japan struggled to maintain 70 operational submarines throughout the war, America built 314 submarines between 1,941 and 1,945. Think about that. Japan couldn't even maintain its starting force. America tripled its submarine fleet while fighting a two-ocean war. American shipyards, Mare Island in California, Electric Boat in Connecticut, Portsmouth in New Hampshire, operated around the clock, launching submarines at rates Japanese planners considered impossible. A single American submarine required approximately 140,000 parts manufactured by contractors in 32 states. The supply chain never faltered. When American submarines needed repairs, spare parts were available immediately. When submarines were lost, replacements arrived within months. Japanese submarines damaged in combat often waited weeks or months for repairs due to parts shortages and industrial bottlenecks that American forces never experienced. Lieutenant Commander Nambu, commanding officer of I-401, would later tell American interrogators something profound. The moment I understood Japan had lost the war came not from any battle, but from overhearing American radio traffic during a patrol. The casual efficiency, the abundance of resources mentioned in routine communications, the sheer volume of coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean, it all pointed to capabilities Japan simply couldn't match. He understood before Hiroshima, before Nagasaki, before the official surrender. He understood because he'd heard the enemy talking, and what they said casually revealed capabilities Japan couldn't achieve even with maximum effort. Here's the tragedy. Japan built some of the most impressive submarines ever conceived. The I-400 class submarines were engineering marvels, larger than American destroyers, capable of circumnavigating the globe, able to carry aircraft, and they accomplished nothing. I-401 and I-400, these massive submarine aircraft carriers surrendered in August 1945. Neither had fired a shot in anger. The planned attack on Ulithi Atoll was cancelled. The planned strike on the Panama Canal never occurred. These magnificent vessels, representing thousands of hours of engineering work and scarce industrial resources, contributed nothing to Japan's war effort. Why? Because American technological superiority made their missions impossible. They couldn't reach their targets undetected. They couldn't operate safely in American-controlled waters. They couldn't survive the hunter-killer groups, the sonobuoys, the radar, the acoustic torpedoes. Captain Arizumi, developer of the I-400 program and one of Japan's most experienced submarine officers, understood this. When ordered to surrender I-401 inches August 1945, he committed suicide aboard his submarine rather than face the humiliation. He understood what many Japanese naval officers were beginning to accept. Japan had challenged an industrial power whose technological capabilities exceeded anything Japanese planners had anticipated. Let me give you numbers that tell the story. American submarines sank an average of one Japanese ship per day throughout 1944. One ship. Every single day. In that single year, 492 Japanese merchant vessels totaling 2,387,780 tons were destroyed by submarine attacks. Japanese merchant marine capacity, which stood at approximately 6 million tons in 1941, had fallen to 2 million tons by August 1945, with only 320,000 tons in condition to carry cargo. The destruction wasn't just a military problem. It was a systematic strangulation of Japan's war economy. Rice from Southeast Asia couldn't reach Japanese cities. Oil from the Dutch East Indies couldn't reach refineries. Rubber, tin, tungsten, all the materials Japan needed to continue fighting were trapped overseas while American submarines patrolled the sea lanes. By 1945, American submarines were experiencing difficulty finding targets large enough to justify torpedo expenditure. The Japanese merchant marine had been virtually eliminated. Japanese cabinet ministers would later acknowledge to the Diet that the greatest cause of defeat was the loss of shipping, that American submarines accomplished more toward victory than any other single weapon system. When I-401 and I-400 surrendered in August 1945, American sailors who boarded them were astounded. These submarines were enormous, longer than destroyers, more advanced in some ways than anything in the American fleet. But American examination also revealed critical weaknesses. The hulls weren't as strong as German or American designs, limiting safe diving depth. The submarines were easy to detect on sonar, their large size creating acoustic signatures American operators could identify from miles away. Their anti-aircraft defenses were inadequate. Most critically, they lacked the integrated systems that made American submarines deadly. Lieutenant Commander Nambu was taken aboard USS Segundo after surrendering I-401. He was given a tour by Lieutenant Commander Stephen L. Johnson. Nambu examined everything: the radar, the sonar systems, the fire control computer, the torpedo loading mechanisms. Everything was more advanced than equivalent Japanese systems. More importantly, everything worked reliably. Equipment didn't break down. Systems functioned as designed. American submariners operated their boats with casual confidence that came from knowing their technology was superior and their support was guaranteed. Japanese submariners had no equivalent confidence. They operated knowing American technology could find them, track them, kill them. The psychological burden was immense. In 1946, I-400, I-401, and other captured Japanese submarines were taken to sea off Hawaii, and they were deliberately sunk as target ships. The decision was driven partly by Soviet demands to examine the submarines. American forces refused to let Soviet engineers study Japanese submarine technology, so they destroyed it. But the symbolism resonated. Japan's finest submarines vessels that represented Japan's technological apex. Vessels that could carry aircraft across the Pacific were destroyed casually by forces that no longer needed them for study. American submarine technology had advanced beyond anything Japanese boats could teach. Their destruction was barely noted in American records. For Japanese submariners who learned of this decision, the message was clear. Japan had built impressive submarines, but America had built technology that made them obsolete. The recordings of I-52's destruction still exist in American archives. Modern analysis by Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory confirmed the sequence of events. Acoustic homing torpedoes guided by sounds transmitted through sonobuoys destroyed I-52. You can still hear it. The explosions, the crushing sounds, the death of a submarine. Commander Uno Kameo and his crew died on June 23, 1944. Hunted by technologies they never understood. They were skilled submariners, disciplined, courageous. But courage meant nothing against sonobuoys floating on the surface, listening to sounds from below, against radar sweeping the horizon beyond visual range, against acoustic torpedoes that hunted submarines autonomously. The ocean that Japanese submariners once prowled with confidence became an American domain through technology and industry. The transformation was complete by mid-1945. Japanese submarines had nowhere to hide, no safe harbor, no hope of survival. The ocean was no longer theirs. It belonged to the nation that built the technology to control it. And that lesson learned painfully by Japanese submariners between 1941 and 1945 shaped post-war Japan. It influenced industrial policy. It drove technological development. It informed military planning for decades. The economic miracle that transformed Japan in the 1950 seconds and 1960 seconds was partly built on lessons learned through defeat. Former naval officers took positions in Sony, Toyota, Honda. They understood that technological superiority required not just good ideas, but complete systems, reliable production, quality assurance, continuous improvement. By the 1980 seconds, Japan's submarines were among the world's finest, incorporating lessons learned through painful defeat. The submariners who had been hunted by American sonar now built submarines using equivalent technology. The circle was complete, but those wire spools in American archives remain, thin metal ribbons preserving the sounds of I-52's destruction. A permanent reminder that in modern warfare, superior technology backed by industrial capacity determines who lives and who dies. Commander Kameo learned that lesson on June 23, 1944. He learned it in the last 3 hours of his life.